Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third Founders Day lecture. This lecture series was started 3 years ago to coincide with our Founders Day, which actually is the same day as our father's birthday. And our father celebrated his 96th birthday on Sunday, the 2nd of October. And we said we wouldn't do this on a Sunday, so we decided that we would do it. We would do it today. What's happened to my screen here? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and
fine.
see.
Okay. Okay, fine. Anyway, so on our Founders Day, we try and do a few new things usually. It started with the inauguration of our museum, which, Bob, you should know, was actually driven by what your father, Jim Adams, actually sort of motivated us to actually start. And we opened our museum on our first Founders Day, which we celebrated, I think, on the 2nd of October in 2007. So it was 2006. Okay, so it's 16 years ago. So I'd like to welcome everyone here. Thank you all for joining. We have many of our Forbes Marshall members from all over the world here this morning and evening, wherever it might be. We also have many of our friends. We have friends from our business colleagues. We have friends from CII, a few from our Family Business Network. And you've been joining us in the last 2 years as well. So thank you very much for being here. The first Founders Days lecture was actually given by Tarun Das, who from CII, formerly CII, now Ananta Aspen, who is also here with us this morning. So thank you for joining us, Tarun. Last year, the lecture was given by Marcus Steele, who unfortunately won't be here this morning because it's about 4:30 in the morning in the UK right now. So he hopefully will watch a recording of this. What we've tried to do with these Founders Day lectures is also to do something unique and have it more than just a lecture. The first one with Tarun was really on institution building. Tarun was responsible for creating this wonderful organization, CII, which Naushad and I have been also associated with. And it's a true institution which was built. Last year, Marcus, who was CEO of an international company, a well-known international company with which we had a joint venture for several years, over 70 years, and was on our supervisory board subsequently, spoke about building fine companies. And this year, we wanted to do something still different. And we are very fortunate to have Bob Adams, a close friend, a family friend, and in his own right, quite an authority on sustainability. And sustainability not with the fluff that we hear so much of today around ESG, but in sustainability in a very meaningful way. So thank you very much, Bob, for agreeing to do this. It's late in the evening in California from where you're joining us, but we're very grateful that you could be with us this morning. So with that, I'd like to pass this on to Naushad so that you can formally and properly introduce Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, Farhad, and let me join him in welcoming everyone to this Founders Day program. We're delighted that you can all be with us, and we're delighted, Bob, that you agreed so so immediately to do this for us. Bob Adams is known to some people, because one of the characteristics of our organization is that people join for decades. And for those of you who were around in 1984, you might remember a fresh graduate in product design from Stanford who came and spent 2 months with us and was actually our first ever product designer in the company. And if I remember correctly, Bob, you worked on an ECG machine at that time, which we've long since got out of the medical instrumentation field. But I think it ended up being a really nice, different design.
That's great.
So Bob is, as Farhad mentioned, we're old family friends. Bob's father, Jim, was very much not only my PhD advisor at Stanford, but one of my sort of guides in life for over 40 years. And it's really been a privilege to be friends with the wider Adams family. I first met Bob when he was still in high school. When he was in high school, I was, I think, in my first year at Stanford. And we've been friends, especially since he came to India. So Bob is professor of design at the California College of Arts, and his area of work is design for sustainability. Along the years of Bob's career, he's done many different things. He's worked as a designer, first as a more conventional designer for IDEO, and then later on built out its design for sustainability practice. And he now consults and lectures on sustainability around the world. He's also worked at Interval Research earlier in his career, one of those very interesting companies that came up in Silicon Valley some years ago. He has advanced degrees from Stanford in product design and mechanical engineering. And then some years ago, he went to UC Davis and got a degree in agronomy. Actually, if I remember correctly, I mean, with a specialty in winemaking and agriculture and sustainable winemaking.
Viticulture, that's correct.
Yeah. And he's been the recipient of several design awards. And one of the other things that Bob's done in his life is to start a farm. He bought some land in the Sacramento Valley. We forget that until very recently, I'm not even sure if it is still true, but until very recently, California, which is today known for being this very high technology based economy, California is also a huge agricultural economy. And agriculture was, I think, the largest part of the Californian economy well into, if I'm not wrong, well into the 80s, before finally technology overtook it. And Bob runs his own farm. He farms it himself. I think he'll tell us something about this a little later on. And he's been able to bring all these different aspects of his life, his understanding of design, his teaching, his understanding of design as a practitioner, his understanding of the theory underlying good design and thinking as a professor, and his work as a farmer into a sort of seamless blend that I think really enriches our understanding of sustainability and what it means. So with those words, Bob, over to you. We all greatly look forward to hearing you, and then I'll turn things over to Jay to run the question and answer session after this. Thanks for being with us.
That's great. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm not sure why I'm seeing two of these. Oh, okay. Can everyone see that and see me?
Yes, Bob.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Very good. Yeah, so thank you very much, Farhad and Naushad. I am truly honored to be here today. I was actually quite surprised to be asked to give this auspicious lecture, and particularly to follow in the footsteps of Tarun Das and Marcus Steele. So I'm thrilled, and it's actually been a great opportunity for me to assemble some new thoughts and things that I've learned recently with some of the ideas that I've been talking about for many years. So we've titled this talk, Rethinking Design for a Sustainable World. And I think I'm just going to jump right into it here.
Is it refusing to change slides?
There we go.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm really going to tell you a couple of stories today. One of which is about design, and which, as Naushad mentioned, in which I have spent my professional career, and one about agriculture, which I have pursued really as an avocation, but also professionally. And I'm going to introduce a few ideas that will be, I think, somewhat provocative, but hopefully make a good platform for some conversation. This is me when I was about 10 years old. This was my favorite place in the world at that time, sitting on this tractor. My grandparents were citrus growers in Southern California. They were orange growers in what was once a very large citrus production area. And when we were children, we spent a lot of time at the orange grove, and I loved nothing better than being there on the farm and sitting on this tractor and pretending that I was a farmer myself. It was a very beautiful place and really heavenly as a kid to be surrounded by the green trees and the oranges and the smell of the blossoms. And it was like a big forest where we could run and get lost. And my brother and I just spent endless hours playing there as we were growing up. My grandparents and their parents and my dad and his brother, who all grew up there, enjoyed a really beautiful and peaceful life. They didn't have a lot of money, but they were surrounded by a lot of beauty and work that was meaningful for them. The area where they farmed was a belt of citrus. These are the groves, and these taller trees in between them are eucalyptus trees, which were planted as windbreaks. It was a very windy area beneath the Cajon Pass in Southern California. And so these windbreaks were planted to protect the orange groves. So for us, it was just like a huge forest of orange trees and eucalyptus trees. And looking back on it now, I can see it was quite a sort of monocultural system, but we just thought it was heavenly at the time. And it came with a real sort of sense of order and beauty and comfort that has been important to me throughout my entire life, and was very important to my father, who in a sense really never fully left Rialto. And I thought it would last forever. It seemed so significant. But the fact is it only lasted 3 generations. And much of it lasted only 1 generation. And that is one thing that's remarkable in California and the West of America in particular, is that so many things come and go so quickly and oftentimes last only a generation. And so the grove basically has been sold, and this is what's happened to it. It's been developed and turned into high density housing in an area that really is not very nice. And so much for our family orange grove. Well, the Grove was part of it was sold when I was in high school, and it was sort of slipping away. And I had such a strong interest in farming that, as Naushad mentioned, I eventually ended up buying my own farm in the Sacramento Valley. And I had worked in farming in the Valley when I was growing up. One of my father's very close friends operated a large farm in the area. And I would come up to this region where I am now to work in the summers. So I sort of learned the ropes, as it were, of farming. And when I bought my farm, the first thing I did was basically get all the equipment that I had operated when I was when I was a kid, basically, a child. And I started using it, and I started farming in the same way that I had grown up farming, during the summers when I was working in the Valley. I apprenticed myself to some of my friends and just started in. So I got a huge tractor and a big disc and started working ground and growing wheat. And farming like this is very satisfying. I mean, it just, the power and the amount of ground that one can cover in a short period of time. And to see a perfectly tilled field like this, not a weed in sight, all level and even, very, very satisfying to the farmer. So I started growing wheat, which is a relatively easy crop to grow. And the way we do it here is that we work the ground in the fall. We grow wheat in the winter when it rains. Our rainy season is in the winter time. And we drill in the seed, so it's in these lovely, evenly spaced, perfectly distributed rows. And as the wheat starts to grow, weeds start to grow also within the wheat. And so the practice here is to apply a broadleaf herbicide, which is usually 2,4-D. And that basically kills all the broadleaf weeds, and the only thing remaining is the wheat. And so it grows in this perfect carpet, and voila, a perfect wheat field. And this also is very satisfying to the farmer. So this is what agriculture looked and felt like as I was growing up. And when I started doing it myself, I loved it. Farming in our area has continued to develop. So my techniques are relatively antique compared to the current state of the art. So these tractors now are all controlled by robots. They're on the global positioning system, and so they basically steer themselves. And everything is, these farming systems now are dependent on having perfect alignment and inch-to-inch precision in terms of where the tractor is operating, because of buried grip irrigation under the field and other constraints. So these systems are amazing. I mean, to see a field that's this large laid out in this kind of perfect symmetry and alignment is really just stunning. It's a stunning achievement of technology. And the crops grow perfectly. There's not a weed in sight or a bug or a pest or anything else. And this is the view from behind my house. And it has this beauty about it that really is stunning, And so it is interesting, this perception of beauty, which it's an industrial beauty, right? This type of perfection is something that we've come to know and expect. And in fact, our expectations have increased through time. And so to see something like this really gladdens our heart. We've spent 10,000 years in farming trying to get to this point. But there are some things behind the system that make it a little less beautiful when we start to really look kind of behind the scenes. So these farming systems are also dependent upon the use of many chemicals for pest control and weed control, some of which are quite toxic to humans and have long-lasting issues around carcinogenicity and ecotoxicity and other types of issues, mutagenicity. In these systems, with this kind of tillage that is performed out here, the fields are worked at the end of the growing season, and then they're basically left in the winter. Usually a volunteer crop of wheat starts to grow, but it's usually sprayed with weed killer like glyphosate or Roundup early in the season. And then all that is left is basically bare earth, like the entire valley is just bare earth. And when the rains come, there's a tremendous amount of soil erosion that occurs. And this is my farm, and it does not gladden one's heart to see this happening to your soil in the wintertime. So as I farmed more and more, of course, when I started in, I was just so happy to be doing it. And I remember just being thrilled buying my first, 2.5 gallon jugs of concentrated Roundup and Goal, herbicide and so on and so forth. But as I spent more and more time with it and got to know it more and more, it really occurred to me that there were a lot of things about the system that were really problematic, and that this facade of perfection was really sort of covering up a lot of deeper issues that were problematic. And I really started asking myself, is this sustainable? And is this a well-designed system? And as time went on, I sort of was feeling like that was less and less the case. And one interesting statistic, I'm not sure if any of you have heard this before. In the USA, it takes 10 calories, about 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to provide 1 calorie of food energy. We use 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to provide 1 calorie of food energy for people to consume. That's stunning. I mean, food plants basically should require no energy. In fact, they take energy from the sun and they perform photosynthesis and they make food. The fact that we figured out how to put 10 calories of fossil fuel energy into a calorie of food, that is an incredible feat of our industrial society. So as I mentioned before, and now Shad spoke about, I trained in design, product design and industrial design. And I learned when I was in college to make beautiful things like this. This was a computer monitor stand that we developed at IDEO in the late 1980s. It was actually the predecessor of IDEO, which was called David Kelly Design. That's for you now, Shad. And so I developed this tool set, and I just love to design stuff, things, objects, technology. That was really what we learned to do, and we loved doing it. And I had a great experience at Forbes Marshall designing technology, and went on to Hewlett Packard, and then Interval Research, and then a variety of other companies to do that. And I spent quite a long time at a company called IDEO, which is a global design consultancy that's quite significant. And we designed thousands, literally thousands of products. Everything from, kitchen appliances to computers to airplane interiors to you name it. I mean, everything under the sun. And so as I spent, more and more time working in that environment as well, I really started to question the work that we were doing, because, we were designing these spectacular products. Like, no one can really argue, that this computer from Apple was at its time, like a really magnificent achievement in design in so many ways. Technology, the aesthetics, the materials, the manufacturing processes. I mean, everything that we really value as designers, this was a great piece of work, right? But we also know that, people use these things for 2 or 3 years, and then they basically throw them away and they get the next greatest one. And, where do these things end up? Well, they end up, as e-waste in China and India and other places in the world, with people scrambling over them to extract, the valuable materials. And in the meantime, having this very toxic, unhealthy experience with impacts that are widespread, from pollution in rivers to, health effects in humans and animals, and so on and so forth. And so, once again, as time went on, I had to sort of start asking these questions, how sustainable is this set of processes? It's been estimated that 99% of the material flows in North America is discarded within 6 months of a project's purchase. 6 months. And that includes, it's not only plastic bags and, disposable things, but it's things like this. 6 months into the landfill. It just seems like if you're going to make something like this, it should last forever and then some. So I really started to sort of feel this disconnect, between the work that I was doing as a designer and my legacy, which could be measured in, metric tons of landfill. And, asking this question, is this good? Is this really good design? I mean, we think it's right. That's the way we evaluate design as being good. And also, as time went on, and especially in the late 80s and early 90s, as the word sustainability started to be bantered around, I really became curious about what that meant. And it just appeared more and more that the design that we were doing was not at all sustainable. I also had to kind of grapple with the fact that I was an industrial designer, and that industrial design in the end is designed for industry. And what we really helped our clients do is basically sell more stuff, because their business models were based on that. And the more stuff that we could help them sell by designing it better, right, making it more desirable for people, or to fit people better, or improving the function, or what have you, it helped them make more profit. And industry, really, as we now know it, is problematic in a number of ways. And my main sort of aha, right, eventually was, and I became very curious about this, was that the things and the systems that we designed, they just didn't integrate in any way with natural systems on the planet, be they biological or geological or what have you. Quite the opposite, in fact, right? They most oftentimes, actually always, are in direct conflict. So by the time I got to sort of the late 90s and the end of interval research, I was really sort of looking for the next thing. And by that time, this word sustainability was really starting to come into common use, and there was some very interesting work that was going on. And I was engaged by a research and consulting group called The Natural Step, who had come out of Sweden, who had a really neat kind of science-based framework for sustainability that I still find really valuable. They engaged me to come on board and integrate their framework for sustainable development with the design process to kind of explore the intersections and the potential there. And so I did. So I started learning a lot about this idea of sustainability. And at that time, Bill McDonough and Michael Braungart were working on a set of lectures that eventually became a book called Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way That We Make Things. And this book actually came out in 2005, but the basis of it came to fruition around 1998 or so, in a set of lectures called the Hanover Lectures. And they put this beautiful description of industry in here, and I just wanted to read it to you. So this is called A Brief History of the Industrial Revolution. It says, imagine that you have been given the assignment of designing the Industrial Revolution retrospectively. With respect to its negative consequences, the assignment would have to read something like this. Design a system of production that puts billions of pounds of toxic material into the air, water, and soil every year, produces some materials so dangerous they will require constant vigilance by future generations, results in gigantic amounts of waste, puts valuable materials in holes all over the planet where they can never be retrieved, requires thousands of complex regulations, not to keep people and natural systems safe, but rather to keep them from being poisoned too quickly, measures productivity by how few people are working, creates prosperity by digging up or cutting down natural resources and then burying or burning them, and erodes the diversity of species and cultural practices. So that's quite a scathing description, right, of the Industrial Revolution. But actually, it's not far off, right? What we figured out as industry really proceeded was that this cycle, and this is directly related to capitalism, that this linear progression in industry is what makes our economy tick. It's what makes it go. Basically, what we do is we mine or extract, or grow raw materials, be it oil or, wood or maize or what have you, gold. And, we don't pay the cost. We don't pay for those things. We pay for the cost of extraction, but really we get them for free. And then we heat, beat, or treat them. And, in some sort of industrial process, generally using fossil fuel. And that's the value addition. Okay. And then we sell them at a profit, and that's it. So the quicker we can move through this cycle, the more profit we can generate. And that's why, as industrial designers, we help people sell more stuff, because they can do this more and generate more profit. It's very straightforward. So, you can see that, right, that this is actually talking about kind of sustainability in the true sense that this is not a sustainable model. So what does sustainability mean anyhow? Well, I really do like the natural step. I'm not going to go through that today. But I think one thing we can do, one thing about, the natural step and a number of these other frameworks that have been developed, is a common thing that they have is that they basically look to ecology and to natural systems as a model of the way that society could interact with the earth, with the planet. And so I thought it would be worth just talking a little bit about some principles from the science of ecology as sort of a basis for this conversation. So an ecosystem, which is a collection of species that are living in a given place with a given set of resources. Ecosystems go through the process of maturing. So, for example, if a forest fire comes through the forest, it basically wipes out all the small plants. It wipes out some of the trees. It pushes all the animals out of the area and basically leaves a burn scar, which is bare. So, that burn scar will sit there for a few months, and then when the rain comes, what happens? Well, it starts to turn green. And the first species that come back are a small number of highly competitive and quickly growing species. First, the grasses come, and then the forbs, and they grow like crazy. So, within a month or two, the floor is carpeted with a green carpet of these quickly growing plants. So that's an example of an immature ecosystem. And in immature ecosystems, as I said, there are a small number of competitive, quickly growing species, and most of the energy in the system is used for growth. Well, as time goes on, larger and larger plants are going to start to grow, and the animals are going to come back, and the ecosystem is going to increase in its diversity. And after a few years, it's going to resemble, and in the case of a forest, it may take 25 years or 50 years even, or maybe 100 years. It's going to become what's known as a mature ecosystem. Well, mature ecosystems are characterized by a large number of diverse species, stable populations, of all those species, relatively stable populations. And most of the energy in mature ecosystems is used to cycle nutrients. So it's not used for growth. You know, the trees grow, they drop their leaves on the soil, the leaves decompose, microbes in the soil break the leaves down, they provide nutrients that go into the soil that the trees take up into their roots, and they use to make new leaves and seeds, and the cycle goes on, you know, and the ants are feeding on the leaves and the sow bugs, and you know, animals are dying and being fed on by each other, and basically all the energy in the system is used to cycle those nutrients that are relative constant. And because the nutrients are relative constant in the system, the populations stay constant as well, because populations are basically limited by the resources that are available to them. Now, if we really think about our society, right, and our industry, what does it resemble? Does it resemble a mature ecosystem, or does it resemble an immature ecosystem? I would argue that it resembles an immature ecosystem. You know, our model for success, right, in industry is market domination and growing as quickly as possible. And even when we look at our economies, right, we measure the health of our economies in growth, right? I mean, if an economy isn't growing at 3 to 5%, you know, we're in a recession, right? If it's growing 0%, we're terrified. And of course, if there's negative growth, that's just, you know, completely unacceptable. So really, we've set our whole society up as an immature ecosystem. And I think this is one of the big reasons that actually it's not in concert with natural systems, is that the very model that we've used to structure our society and our industry is in direct conflict with the way that every other system and species on the planet acts and behaves. So as I learned more and more about this, I became increasingly curious about this question: what if our society actually functioned like a mature ecosystem rather than an immature one? And this is the same question that a number of people who've been thought leaders in the sustainability space have asked. And it's inspired such works as Natural Capitalism by Paul Hawken, his other book, Ecology of Commerce, the work in biomimicry that Janine Benyus has done. A lot of people have asked very provocative questions about how we could rethink our society. And that was the genesis of the book Cradle to Cradle and the philosophy behind it that I talked about earlier, that Bill McDonough and Michael Braungart wrote. So some things that are really important about ecosystems is that mature ecosystems are not putting their energy into growth. What they're really doing is maintaining a dynamic equilibrium. So certainly individual species are competing with one another, but because they're dependent upon one another for their very survival and their health, the overall system is in this ever-changing, ever-fluid equilibrium, and that's its healthy state. Ecosystems work, and natural systems are cyclical. They're not linear. Everything moves in cycles, both in biological systems and in fact in geologic systems. The time frames are very different. But you know, sand eventually gets subsumed in ocean trenches and gets turned back into rock and pushed up into mountain ranges. It just takes, you know, hundreds of millions or billions of years. The cycles happen a lot faster in ecosystems. And another thing about natural systems is that they are by their nature both regenerative and restorative. Now, that's been a huge advantage to us as humans, because until about 1970, we were able to do pretty much anything we wanted to the planet. And it had enough regenerative capability to repair itself pretty well. Since that time, there have become enough of us humans that we've overwhelmed its capacity to regenerate the destruction that we've caused to natural systems. That's why we're experiencing a massive extinction of species. That's why we're seeing warming of the climate. That's why we're seeing so many issues in as we look around the natural world. So, it's an interesting question to ask ourselves, right? What would our society look like if it in itself was, what would our industry look like if it was regenerative and restorative? We have global warming because we have disrupted the Earth's carbon cycle. Carbon isn't bad. We're made of carbon. We breathe carbon dioxide out and trees breathe it in and make oxygen for us. Carbon moves in the cycle constantly in the system. The problem is that we took all this carbon out of the earth as oil and coal and natural gas, and we burned it and we put it into the atmosphere. That's the problem. It's completely out of balance. We've unbalanced the balance of the earth's systems. Me too. We know that tillage emits CO2. It's a practice that's not great. Our entire agriculture, as I said, is fueled by, diesel fuel and natural gas to make fertilizers. And, I probably use 10 calories of fossil fuel energy to produce a calorie of food energy as well. I'm like everybody else. So, this really started to catch my attention as the years went by, as I was farming more and more. And a few years ago, around 2017, my stepmom, Marion, gave me this book for Christmas. I had not previously known about it, although I'd been hearing more and more about carbon, of course, and, agriculture and so on. And some claims had been made about agriculture's potential to sequester carbon, to basically take it out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil as a way to aid global warming. And this was the first book that really laid out the science behind the intersection between agriculture and carbon. And what Eric Tonsmeyer proposed here is a set of farming systems and crops that, if used, would be basically, net carbon negative, that would sequester carbon and help to mitigate climate change and food security. It's a brilliant book. So, one thing that became really clear is that carbon is in soils, it is organic matter. And, spending time around organic farmers and so on and so forth, I had been learning that, organic matter is really important in the soil for a lot of reasons. And in fact, it's really a good deal if you can put more organic matter into your soil, more carbon, because most of our soils, after being farmed like this for so many years, are completely depleted in organic matter. And in farming, when we increase the carbon in the soil, just about everything else gets better. The tilth of the soil, which is how workable it is, the water holding capacity, the biodiversity, the nutrient availability, the yield, resilience of crops, disease resistance. I mean, you just can keep going down the list. Everything improves. So a lot of organic farmers know that they just need to put a lot of carbon into the soil. And they do that by using practices like growing cover crops and incorporating them, by using animal manure, by reducing the amount of tillage, by intercropping, by using crop rotations that put organic matter into the soil, and a lot of other practices. And so I started doing those things too. I just thought it totally made sense. And sure enough, it works. So interestingly, this came out about the same time as well. Simply put, recent data from farming systems and pasture trials around the globe show that we could sequester more than 100% of current annual CO2 emissions with a switch to widely available and inexpensive organic management practices, which we term regenerative organic agriculture. These practices work to maximize carbon fixation, organic matter, while minimizing the loss of that carbon once returned to the soil, reversing the greenhouse effect. Now, this is controversial. And in fact, Eric Toensmeyer in this book says actually it's probably not 100% of the solution. But I think what's important is that agriculture is not, though it may not be the complete solution to global warming, it has to be part of the solution. Because, and the numbers vary widely, depending who you listen to. But, agriculture contributes from 1/4 to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a lot. Industry, of course, is right up there too, and transportation and, heating and electricity and energy, right? The thing we know about those things, right? But agriculture is huge. Now, the other thing that's not represented in this graph is this potential for agriculture to actually sequester carbon, because trees and plants and, they breathe carbon dioxide and they put it into themselves and through their roots into the soil. It's brilliant. So, a farm should be net carbon negative. It should be pulling all this carbon down, and as things are growing, right, it should be, most of that stuff should be going into the soil, except for the little bit of food or what have you that we take off the top of it. So shortly after the Carbon Farming Solution book came out, and really within a few months, this book came out, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. Another brilliant book by Paul Hawken, who is one of the true thought leaders in the space of sustainability. And what Paul did is assembled a team of scientists, and they basically analyzed the potential for 100 interventions in society in terms of their ability to reduce carbon emissions or to sequester carbon. And they figured that these 100 innovations would be adequate to reverse global warming by 2050 if we just got on the ball and did them. And it's a fascinating book. And what's even more cool about it is they actually quantified it. So they look at various sectors and aspects of our society, whether they're in industry or agriculture, what have you, and they quantified the gigatons of carbon that could be reduced or fixed, along with the potential, the cost of executing those interventions. And then they looked at the potential savings or profitability of those things. So it's genius. And it's so inspiring. So here's an example. Sustainable intensification for smallholder farmers. This is from kind of the food and agriculture sector. The potential of utilizing these practices, like we were just discussing, whether it's cover cropping or crop rotation or manuring, et cetera, have the potential to sequester from 1.36 to 0.68 gigatons of carbon. The potential cost would be $74 to $149 billion, but the potential net profit would be, about the same, right? The returns could be 170 to 350 billion. So this is a potentially profitable intervention. So they've got 100 of these, and they're all over the sectors and the kind of the map as we know it. You'll like this one a lot because it's near and dear to your hearts at Forbes Marshall. The great surprise when I got this book and started reading through it. So all the interventions are ranked in terms of their potential to reverse global warming. So number 6 was family planning for girls and women. And number 7 was educating girls and women. Actually, I think maybe the order was reversed. when you put those two together, it was the #1 intervention with the potential of reversing global warming by 2050. That was just stunning to me. The second one was refrigerant management. It turns out it's just like, that refrigerants are so damaging and emit so much, in terms of ozone depletion and also creating greenhouse gases. They're hugely problematic. But so, here you go, 68.9 gigatons of carbon through time could be. And this is because, if we had fewer people being produced from family planning and we had more and more education, it's going to provide a greater and greater platform for people to go out and address these problems, right? Whether it's about learning about new techniques for agriculture or, training to become designers or managers in industry and creating interventions or what have you. So just amazing, I thought, to see this stuff quantified. Clean cooking, here's another one, clean cook stoves. So, this is interesting, huge. It's actually huge. It's number, 13 or something like that on the list. It's way up at the top because so many people in the world use biomass, wood primarily to cook, right? This is actually Women in Good Drought. There's some expense to, provide people with clean cooking technologies. In this case, they're actually saying that someone would have to probably foot the bill for that. Interesting. So when we start to look, so they've got everything divided out by sectors, and I thought you would find this quite interesting in Forbes, Marshall, because it starts to look a lot like you. So this is the electricity sector, okay? And let's look at kind of what the interventions are and kind of the potential here. Biomass power, seems like you guys do that, guys and gals. Automation systems, waste to energy, methane capture, high efficiency heat pumps, solar hot water. And then we get into other things, that are similar. They have great, distributed energy storage, distributed solar voltaics. So, most of these interventions are, have a huge potential to sequester carbon. They generally are, obviously take some investment, but in the end are profitable in the billions or even trillions of dollars. Onshore wind turbines, micro wind turbines. Fascinating stuff. Let's look at another sector. This is buildings. Biogas for cooking. Biogas, interesting. I think you do that. Automation systems, I think you do that. We talked about clean cooking. You could do that. District heating, sounds like you. Heat efficiency, high efficiency heat pumps. It goes on, right? Refrigerant management, smart thermostats. It's actually smart thermostats, huge potential for decreasing global warming. Solar hot water. Sounds like Forbes Marshall. So I just think, for me, when I saw a drawdown, I sort of thought, a lot of people look at this kind of sustainability thing and global warming like as constraints, right? These are things that constrain the way that we can do business, and we need to comply with them. But we can turn that around and look at it as like the greatest opportunity that has ever been presented to us as a society and as designers. It's tremendous. It really is the chance to redesign our society. So in the last few years, I've been getting increasingly interested in the idea that we might be able to use carbon as a measure for the quality of design. And the reason that I'm becoming very curious about this is that sustainability is actually really complicated, right? It's hard to measure is something more sustainable or not. It's complex. What do you focus on? Is it toxicity, or do you focus on, energy, or do you focus on, there's so many different things, right? But and this was kind of inspired by my experience in agriculture, and partly by this sort of realization that, so this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which describes kind of the hierarchy of needs that people have, from very basic to kind of the higher order, higher level needs. On the bottom are the physiological needs: food, warmth, water, sleep. And in the middle are the things that we all need, right? A sense of belonging and love from other people. We need esteem, good self-esteem. And at the top is kind of self-actualization. And as I've thought about it more and more, what I have realized is that we have figured out how to put fossil fuel into every level of our basic needs, right? So we talked about food, 10 calories of fossil fuel energy per calorie of food. But as we go up the track, we can see that, everything else as well, we've just imbued it with fossil fuel, including these things, right? Cell phones. Well, yeah, I guess would these meet like belongingness needs? And maybe they meet safety needs sometimes. They certainly meet esteem needs. And in fact, they meet a lot of self-actualization needs. There's a reason that I have an Apple cell phone. So what I've noticed is that in design, when we simply decrease the carbon footprint of our products, just about everything else gets better. And it's mostly because we're taking the fossil fuel out of them. So toxicity decreases, global warming, greenhouse gases decrease, eutrophication, which is the nutrient pollution of waterways that creates dead zones in oceans and rivers, lakes, carcinogenicity, which is, causation of cancer. You can just go down the list and almost everything gets better. Now, it doesn't directly kind of address some of the social issues that we've been talking about, but in some ways it does, because environmental issues are social issues, okay? I think we have to stop separating those things, because the environment affects us directly as humans. It affects our health. It affects our well-being in so many ways. It affects the systems that we depend on for our survival, the green systems of the earth, the species of the earth. So I'm really interested in this idea. Can we use carbon as a lens, right? And it's one thing, and we can measure it. You're either decreasing the amount of carbon in a product or you're increasing it. It's binary. Unlike sustainability, which is notoriously non-binary. So another thing that drawdown tells us is that, to start making things better in this way, it's going to require collaboration, not only across organizations, but across sectors. And why is that? Well, it's really hard at this time to envision, like if you're Apple Computer, it's really hard to envision how to design all the carbon out of these. Like, could I make a regenerative laptop? I don't know. What does that mean? But if you design these things, it's actually really not at all hard to envision how to design the carbon out of these. And in fact, how to create systems to produce these that are regenerative and restorative. So it may be that Apple Computer needs to partner with these people to create a net zero or net negative carbon footprint. And when we start to look through drawdown, we see the synergies that potentially exist across sectors, and it becomes really fascinating, and the potential is huge. But of course, it's way harder to work between organizations than it is in one organization, and working across sectors and so on, of course, provides even more challenges. So I think three things that are going to be important for us in the future. One is going to be kind of making the shift from this idea of sustainable, which, as Farhad mentioned, I think more and more has come to mean like doing more of the same thing. When we look through a natural systems lens at sustainability, it means that we would have to do almost everything in our society differently, which requires change, and change is really hard. But so I think we need to move from talking about sustainable to really thinking about regenerative and restorative as measures of good design. Okay. I think also we're going to have to make the shift from technology to biology. When you look at our history, what we've done is continue to take the latest technology and throw it at the same problems that we've tried to solve before. And we don't do it. We don't fix them. We just take the latest and greatest thing, whether it's like cast iron or it's the transistor or it's digital technology or it's the web or whatever. And we think like, oh, this is going to do it. We're going to solve all these problems. Well, it doesn't. And it's because our technology does not function in concert with natural systems. Some of it's starting to. And that really is the technology that's inspired by biology. So I think this is going to have to be a fundamental shift for us. And I love technology as much or more than anyone, as did my dear father. But, you know, we got to start doing things in a different way. I think this is another thing too, right? We always innovate in incremental fashion. That's the way we do things as humans. But at the same time, I think we have to set our sights on innovations that are more transformational in nature. And that says maybe not only about the innovations that we make themselves, but also the potential for their impact to broaden and scale, which is not necessarily something that we normally take into account when we're designing. So what might looking through this lens of carbon mean for Forbes Marshall? Well, I think one thing it means is that you're actually already remarkable in what you're doing. I mean, when I look at your initiatives and corporate social responsibility, they're right on target. I mean, you are educating and skilling children and youth, particularly girls and women. We look at drawdown and like, that's it. That's the biggest thing. You know, and so many of the other initiatives you have going, you know, point to this understanding of the issues. And maybe you haven't made this linkage directly. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to do that today, you know, to something as sort of individual and distinct as carbon, global warming. Like this connects directly to that. So I applaud you for these initiatives. I think looking through this lens of carbon opens up other opportunities as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, you know, as I discussed, like this is, you know, you're doing it. Energizing businesses. Well, I think we're starting to see from drawdown that the way that we can think about what this means is really potentially broad and has the potential to inspire many innovations and probably business opportunities for Forbes Marshall moving into the future. So I think this is very exciting. But look, 2015 biomass boiler, you know, we know from drawdown, right? And I talked about a few of the things, right? Whether it's biogas, the work you're doing in biogas generation, biomass energy creation. And so you're already in this sweet spot that is not far away from the potential for a number of these other areas that we know desperately need attention to improve the global situation. So what this sort of made me think about was, you know, as I said, there's so many of these opportunities here. And so what it made me curious about, and I think it relates to this idea that I feel that we have to stop teasing apart kind of the idea of social development from environmental or social sustainability from environmental sustainability. So it made me really wonder, what if you start to think at Forbes Marshall about integrating the core business with the corporate social responsibility to really scale your impact? Because we know that the things that you're doing already are the right things to be doing. And we also are learning more and more, and this is what Drawdown tells us, that interventions like this, so this could be potentially a technology intervention, when women do not have to gather firewood, which takes a huge amount of time, they have more time in the home, which opens up time for education, family planning, spending time with their kids who are getting educated, taking their kids to school, working at other jobs to make money, to pay school fees. So these technology interventions actually connect directly to the social interventions. And so that's why I'm really curious about what this means for Forbes Marshall moving into the future. Because I see you're on this trajectory, but using this lens and starting to think about, because if you enable this, right, it enables the type of work you're doing directly with, with villagers near the factory and in these other areas. It enables that impact to spread beyond the direct touch points that you have, literally, potentially to a global level. And I think that's a really exciting idea. So what might looking through the carbon lens mean for India and for Forbes Marshall? And this has been something I've been curious about for several years now. So when we look back before the Industrial Revolution, we find out that actually India and China had about half the share of the world's entire gross domestic product. If you go back to 1500, it was almost the whole thing. You can see that the US and Europe didn't really take off until the Industrial Revolution happened. So in the US, like our entire economy is based on like the Industrial Revolution, those practices. I mean, that's all we know. That's typical of the West. But India and China have this sort of deep-rooted experience in creating a society and a culture that was not based on the Industrial Revolution. India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas from agricultural practices, even bigger than the United States. This graph represents the yellow is greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and the blue is greenhouse gas emissions from basically deforestation. So Brazil's huge because they're burning down all their rainforests, as are Indonesia. India, it's mostly from farming. China, United States of America are similar. So 30% of global agriculture emissions are coming from these three countries. India obviously has a huge potential to impact that. India has this deep, deep tradition of craft. Naushad talks about this in his book, of creating a really sophisticated, super low carbon society, based on craft practices and this amazing command of materials that were really sort of pre-industrial revolution materials. Deep, deep traditions and knowledge that exists there. India is a Carl. This is a country with abundant rural labor. And one of the books that influenced me the most was this one that a fellow named Tom Tomich wrote, who was a professor at UC Davis and was an economist who studied at Stanford in the Food Research Institute. And what he pointed out in this book called Transforming Agrarian Economies is that the model of agricultural economic development that we used in the USA isn't necessarily the best one for using everywhere. And he drew the example of Japan and the sort of agricultural economic development that occurred there. He pulled that up in contrast. And the way he described the difference was, he said, in the USA, you know, our system was about, we had all this land and we had all these natural resources, but we didn't have that many people. So we created a system that was based on land using and labor saving. In Japan, the opposite was the case. So they developed a system that was based on land saving and labor using. And what's interesting about CARLs, countries with abundant rural labor, is that, you know, the Japanese model actually makes a lot more sense for them than the USA model. Now, we, of course, have exported the Green Revolution to the world, right? You know, high yielding varieties and fertilizers and mechanization and all that kind of thing, which has caused many farmers to commit suicide in India because of its longer term effects. But, you know, India actually is really well positioned to embrace its identity as a CARL and its agricultural heritage, and to really think about what a sustainable agriculture would mean in the context of a country like itself and in the context of the world. Excuse me. I was recently in Africa working with farmers. These were some of them. They had the most amazing farms there. Here's well, you would call this a banana farm, but it's not just a banana farm, because when you look in the understory, they're growing maize, they're growing a cover crop of beans, which are a nitrogen fixing crop that bring nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it into the soil to fertilize the crop plants. And you can't see it, but there actually also is cassava planted here, so that when the maize crop is done, the cassava will grow. Seeing these farms was so inspiring for me. Like, this is what I dream my farm could look like. But I know that in the United States, we're not going to be able to make farms like this. You know, I'm looking to the small farmers of India and Africa and other places to change the way that agriculture looks on the planet, because this is a really intensive system in terms of people. And it's done on relatively small parcels of land. So it makes a lot of sense in countries with abundant rural labor. And it's beautiful. These systems work amazingly well for farmers in terms of improving their livelihood, improving their farms and their soil, and the benefits are many. We know that there's a deep, deep tradition of sustainable agriculture in both China and India. This book, Farmers of 40 Centuries, it's fantastic. It was by a professor from the United States who went to China in 1905, right before the synthetic fertilizers came out, and basically studied the farming systems in there, Korea, and Japan. And, you know, there were fields that have been in steady production for 4,000 years because of a careful system of nutrient cycling, crop rotation, so on and so forth. We know the same thing's true in India. There are some great examples going on in India. The Zero Budget Natural Farming Project, which is an incredible initiative that's being supported by the government of Andhra Pradesh now, is a system based on traditional practices in India, regenerative, carbon negative, organic, and is providing tremendous benefits for the farmers that are participating in it. So, you know, we can really ask a bolder question and say, well, what would it look like for Forbes Marshall to, you know, partner with zero budget natural farming to generate a net negative carbon footprint, right? What might the interventions look like? What would the opportunities be? I don't know the answer to these things, but I think they're interesting questions. Are Forbes Marshall and India uniquely well positioned to lead the world in rethinking design for a sustainable world? I think so, absolutely. I think it's a really exciting prospect. I think the new design definition of good design is going to look like this.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was really, really wonderful.
It's
Really
been
wonderful.
a pleasure, and it was a
Thank
real
you.
honor to speak with you all today. Thank you very much.